I have translated for the Kethani court for 11 years. I have rendered the words of queens and petitioners, smugglers and senators, into whatever language the room required. I have stood at the edge of moments that remade treaties, watching the powerful say careful things to other powerful people, and I have learned to keep my face perfectly still. The day Calder Voss walked into the grand attestation chamber, I almost broke that habit. He was the last delegate through the arch. Every other representative had already cleared the registry scan, their biometric thread recognized, their credentials confirmed, their names and stations announced to the chamber in the arch's cool, unhurried voice. 12 delegates from 6 systems, all documented, all verified, all seated on their respective tiers of the Kethani diplomatic floor. The chamber was enormous, a hemisphere of pale stone that caught sound and held it, so that even a whispered conversation near the floor carried faintly to the upper galleries. The attestation arch stood at the chamber's entrance like a ceremonial gate, and everyone who walked beneath it was announced to the room. Calder walked through it the way he walked through most things, steadily, without theater. He was 38 years old or thereabouts, dark hair going gray at the temples, jaw stubbled past the point of deliberate grooming, eyes that moved around a room the way a garrison man's eyes do, not suspiciously, just carefully. He wore the dark blue attaché uniform of the Terran Kethani liaison office, no decorations except the small silver pin that marked a 4-year posting. He was not a powerful man in the way the chamber understood power. He was a garrison attaché who had spent 4 years doing the work that powerful men did not want to do, the late dispatches, the supply negotiations, the small dignities extended to Kethani staff that most Terran officials did not bother with. The arch spoke. Unregistered nonentity. The chamber did not go silent immediately. It took 2 or 3 seconds, the way a crowd absorbs an unexpected sound before it fully understands what it heard. Then the murmuring began. I knew what had happened, because I had been briefed before the session. A man calling himself a Terran trade envoy had appeared before the Kethani Council 6 weeks earlier and caused what the diplomatic logs called an incident. He had invoked treaty language he had no authority to invoke, made assurances he had no standing to make, and when his identity was eventually queried in depth, the records had been falsified and then scrubbed. The Kethani authentication system, which did not forgive errors of that kind, had purged the entire associated Terran liaison block from its registry as a precautionary measure. Every human in the posting had been flagged. Most had been re-registered through the proper channels in the weeks since. Calder Voss apparently had not. The delegate is unregistered. That was Counselor Yevrath, the Empress's senior judicial advisor, speaking from the second tier. His voice was not unkind, but it was precise. The protocol is clear. An unrecognized presence cannot participate in attestation proceedings. The delegate will need to withdraw and submit to the verification queue. There were 8 other Kethani advisors on the floor, and I watched most of them shift toward agreement. This was not malice. It was procedure. The registry was the registry. 2 court attendants moved toward Calder from the far door. He did not retreat. He did not argue. He stood where he was, hands at his sides, and waited, not with defiance exactly, but with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that the situation is what it is, and that making it worse through agitation helps no one. His eyes went to the floor, measured the distance to the attendants, then came up again. Patient. Contained. I was watching the floor, which is where my job puts my attention, so I almost missed it. The Empress had not moved since the arch spoke. She sat at the head of the chamber on the primary tier, elevated by 4 steps, which is the Kethani custom for the sovereign during attestation. Her ceremonial robe was deep indigo worked with copper thread, and her dark hair was up in the formal arrangement that Kethani court protocol requires for full sessions. She was a tall woman, which is not unusual among the Kethani, and she held herself the way Kethani royalty are trained to hold themselves. Composed, upright, the face revealing only what is intended. Her amber-green eyes had found Calder the moment the arch spoke. She had not looked away. I have been in this chamber long enough to know the difference between a sovereign watching a protocol problem unfold and a sovereign watching a person. These are not the same thing. Yevrath was watching a protocol problem. The two attendants were managing a procedure. The other delegates were observing a delay. The Empress was watching Calder Vos. And this is the part I keep returning to, he met her eyes and held them, and then he did something I did not expect. He gave her the smallest incline of his head. Not a bow, not deference. Something more like acknowledgement, the way two people who know each other well can have an entire conversation across a crowded room without speaking. The attendants were 4 steps away from him. Stop. One word. The Empress did not raise her voice, but the chamber's acoustics did the work for her. The attendants stopped. Yevrath turned. Your Serene Eminence, the protocol. I know the protocol, Yevrath. She stood. When a Kethani Empress stands during a seated attestation, it is not a common thing. I had seen it twice in 11 years. The chamber understood this. The murmuring ceased. She descended the 4 steps from the primary tier to the chamber floor. This is also not a common thing. An Empress does not come down to the floor during proceedings. The floor comes to her. I watched 12 delegates from 6 systems go very still. She crossed the floor to where Calder stood. It was perhaps 20 meters. She walked it at the measured pace of a woman who is entirely aware of what she is doing. She stopped in front of him. I am a translator. My whole profession is the weight of words, the difference between what is said and what is meant, the distance between one language and another. I have spent 11 years understanding that distance. I have never, before or since, been as aware of a silence as I was in the 8 seconds between when the Empress stopped in front of Calder Vos and when she spoke. He looked at her, she looked at him. The chamber did not breathe. This man's name, the Empress said, in the formal Kethani of official proceeding, is Calder Vos. He holds a 4-year posting to the Kethani Terran Liaison Office. He is the human who, during the cold season 2 years past, when the supply lines to the Orith resettlement camp were disrupted, personally arranged 7 additional distribution runs from his own posting's logistics budget without being asked to do so, and without reporting it as a formal action, because he did not think it required recognition. She paused. He is known to me. I was translating. That is my job. I was rendering her Kethani into the simultaneous feed for the non-Kethani delegates, and I was doing it correctly, and I was keeping my face still. It was the hardest thing I had done in 11 years. He is known to me, the Empress said again, this time not to the chamber, to him. The registry is in error. This court recognizes Calder Vos, Terran Liaison Attaché, 4th posting, as a registered and welcome presence in this chamber. She looked at Yevrath. Note the recognition formally. Yevrath, to his credit, recovered quickly. Noted, Your Serene Eminence. The record is amended. The Empress did not move for another moment. She and Calder were standing close enough that the chamber could see both their faces clearly, and both faces were composed. That is the only word. She had not touched him. He had not spoken. There was no scene, no theater. Just 2 people standing in the center of a diplomatic chamber, one of whom had just overridden a galactic registry with 7 sentences and a name. He said, quietly enough that I only caught it because of where I was standing. I didn't need the recognition. I know, she said. That is why I gave it. She returned to the primary tier. The session resumed. Yevrath called the first agenda item with the smooth authority of a man who has long since learned that the best thing to do after a sovereign makes an extraordinary gesture is to return immediately to the ordinary world. I finished my shift. I filed my translation log. I went home. I have thought about those 8 seconds many times since. The registry said he was nothing. It said it in a room full of people with the authority to act on that judgment, and they were prepared too. And the Empress, who did not need to stand, who did not need to descend, who could have issued a correction from the primary tier with a word to Yevrath, chose to walk across the floor herself and say his name herself, because some recognitions should not be delegated. The machine called him a non-entity. She called him known. In 11 years of translation, I have never found a better word for what I saw.